Hello friends, have you heard about the 1991 borders that everyone in the West is talking about? This video will clear up any questions you have about who's right regarding state sovereignty and borders. For example, one of the main demands of the Ukrainian side for a ceasefire is to return to the 1991 borders. The 1991 borders mean the borders of the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine with Crimea, Donbass, and those territories that are now under Russian control. But there is one nuance here, which all major politicians of the world know about, but they intentionally keep it quiet. I think they should know this important information that reveals the structure of international law, which they often mention. That is, there is very important information concerning the main demand of the Ukrainian side, under which it agrees to stop hostilities. But everyone is silent about it. Even Putin. Why everyone is silent and what this information is, you will find out now. As has been said many times, international law is built on the outcome of world wars. The mankind gathered 4 times after large-scale wars and created a new world order. It was in 1648, the Peace of Westphalia after the 30 Years' War, at the Congress of Vienna in 1815 after the Napoleonic Wars, at the Paris Conference in 1919 after World War I, at the Yalta, San Francisco Conference in 1945 after World War II, when the Charter of the United Nations was adopted. And we are today officially living following the results of World War II. The last war that defined the world order and therefore international law is World War II. Well, we can say that tens of millions of people died for international law as a result of the Second World War. After that war, the world was divided. Meetings were held in Yalta, Paris, San Francisco, where various documents forming international law were signed. The UN Charter was drafted. Further, in 1975, again based on the results of the Second World War, the Helsinki Accords were signed, where it was said about inviolability of post-war borders, non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries, and the like. In general, in this case, Europe and the Soviet Union confirmed the outcome of the Second World War. I would like to pay special attention to the fact that no one has cancelled these rules. And these rules say that there are the borders of the Soviet Union, which should be respected and recognized by all members of the world community. And most importantly, not to interfere in the affairs of the state. This is prescribed by the current international document signed in Helsinki in 1975. But what happened on the territory of the Soviet Union? In 1991, several heads of republics, Yeltsin, Kravchuk, and Shushkevich, gathered in Belarus and declared that the Soviet Union had ceased to exist. And what is the most absurd thing? Everyone took it seriously and agreed with it. And today this is the official version of the collapse of the USSR. They say that 3 men gathered in Belovetskaya Pushcha and dissolved the Soviet Union. That was the end of it. But think about all this nonsense. 3 officials gathered and terminated the existence of a great country. It's absurd. The Soviet Union had a basic law, the Constitution of the USSR. There was leadership, there were government authorities. And these 3 men said to them, "You are no more." And they were like, "Yeah, well, okay, we're no more." To make it even clearer, imagine that today, some heads of 3 Russian republics gather and say that the Russian Federation no longer exists. Well, they would probably either be arrested or sent to a nut house somewhere. But in 91, the whole country agreed with these lunatics. Again, imagine Putin being told that the Russian Federation no longer exists and resigning like Gorbachev.
I am terminating my activity as the president of the USSR. I am taking this decision on principle.
In general, what I want to say is this. What Yeltsin, Kravchuk, and Shushkevich did could not have influenced the Soviet Union's existence as a state. They had no authority to dissolve and liquidate it. They were only the heads of 3 republics out of 15, over which stood the basic law of the USSR, the Constitution of 1977. There is another example for better understanding. Let's say that some 3 police generals get together and decide that now in Russia there is left-hand traffic of cars. But no one will agree with them. And here 3 drunks declared that they had liquidated an entire state. And the leadership of this very state, i.e. Gorbachev, agreed with them. And what is important? So it was Gorbachev who was to blame for the collapse of the country. It was he who had the power. It was he, Gorbachev, who liquidated the country. And what was decided in Belarus, from the legal point of view, means nothing at all. Gorbachev on purpose liquidated the government authorities of the USSR, and there is no country without the government authorities. This is the most important and the most terrible geopolitical crime of the 20th century, which nobody is still investigating. The man, of course, with his team purposefully knocked out of the country what it was holding on to. And when it collapsed, he shifted the responsibility onto some other weirdos who were just drinking at the country house and talking rubbish. So here's the main outcome. The Soviet Union was essentially liquidated by Gorbachev. He personally signed the documents that led to it. According to the laws, both domestic and international, it was impossible to kill the USSR as a state, but it was done, and that is a crime. Now, as far as the borders are concerned, before the Soviet Union fell, Gorbachev signed a law on how the Soviet Union could be divided. Well, in fact, he gave the instructions on how to do it. So we had a unified state, in fact. But Gorbachev says, and if someone wants to leave the USSR, well, here you are, we passed a law for that. It is an idiotic decision in itself. Well, imagine if Putin today passed a law on the right of regions to withdraw from Russia. Well, that's already a betrayal, but nevertheless, the law was passed, and the Soviet Union, in terms of its borders, could have been destroyed legally. Well, both in terms of domestic laws and international law. This law simply described the procedure for the republics to withdraw. According to it, referendums on withdrawal should be held. Then there should be a transition period to establish economic and social ties in a new way, and so on. In other words, the very top of the Soviet Union gave guidance on how to liquidate the Soviet Union as a political force of law. But the greedy, covetous leaders of the Union republics felt that this very top leadership was weak and wanted to liquidate the country. They simply decided not to observe any laws and withdrew the Soviet Union without observing any laws and procedures at all. That is, they violated both domestic and international rules. That's how the famous 1991 borders came into being. That is, the border of 1991 is a criminal condition, some kind of illegal takeover of territory and people. So it led to wars which began in the post-Soviet territory. Roughly speaking, let us say one person stole furniture from a dormitory, and when other residents tried to take it back, he complained to the police. Well, this is what Ukraine's demand to return to the 1991 borders looks like. There is a claim that the 1991 border is some kind of geopolitical reality that should be accepted. They say, well, it turned out this way. What can be done? We should accept it and go on living. Why are you sticking to some laws of the USSR, which no longer exists? After all, you can also look at the laws of the Russian Empire, and it was probably illegally disintegrated too. That's right, you can talk about anything. Let's say, let's launch a nuclear weapon at Washington and immediately say that this event corresponded to the geopolitical reality. Let's ignore it. Or someone will seize any country, raise his hands and say, that's it, this is the geopolitical reality. Let's not remember the old. To avoid lawlessness, we need international law, which today is built on the results of the Second World War, where the 1991 border is a gross violation of it, and this is lawlessness. From this point of view, assume that Ukraine did not leave the Soviet Union at all. Why did someone decide that certain borders belong to him? Well, as they say, on a whim. All documents that confirm these borders, such as the Almaty Declaration, they contradict international law and the results of the Second World War. They contradict the UN Charter, the Helsinki Act, and even moral principles, because our grandfathers and great-grandfathers died for the 1945 border. Those who advocate for 1991 borders are just spitting on their graves. However, these boundaries are universally accepted worldwide. Even Putin does not voice this information, although for him it is like an ace up his sleeve. Since when Gorbachev liquidated the authorities of the USSR, the world as a whole recognized Russia as the successor of the Soviet Union. Let me remind you, Russia took the place of the USSR in the UN Security Council. This is also set in our laws. And Russia can initiate an investigation of the crimes that led to the 1991 borders. Roughly speaking, Putin can say, what 1991 borders are you talking about? This is a crime. Let's investigate whether it was legally done. If not, we will act according to the law and punish those responsible. And in this case, we will have to resort to the document that defined the republic's exit from the Soviet Union, where it is written that they should leave the Soviet Union with what they came with. Of course, it is written a bit differently there. Assume that autonomous republics should hold referendums and determine their own status, and they were just fetched along, and nobody asked them. And look, instead of voicing this information, Putin announced a special operation. That is, in fact, he decided to take by force what the Ukrainian authorities, leaving the Soviet Union, should have given to the Union state. And why so? Why did Russia's leadership take such a harsh path? When it was possible to appeal to the laws, the results of the Second World War, the Helsinki Act? In my opinion, the whole problem lies in other republics, which will regard such statements by Putin as an infringement on their territory. Well, more precisely, the territory they should have given back when they left the Soviet Union. And this is, for example, the whole north of Kazakhstan, Nagorno-Karabakh, over which Armenia is fighting with Azerbaijan. But it belongs neither to Armenia nor to Azerbaijan. This also applies to other territories, such as Transnistria and the lands currently at war. To avoid conflicts with elites from other post-Soviet countries, Putin has to stick to the narrative that the entire pro-Western world adheres to, namely that 1991 illegal takeover of land and people is the right thing to do. So we are in a stalemate. It seems that the way out is right there, next to us, logical, simple, peaceful. It lies on the surface. But we go the other way, the hard way. That's how it is, friends, about the 1991 borders. And that's all for now.